The moment I found out, it felt as though the ground beneath my feet had vanished. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest I could barely hear the muffled sobs escaping my own lips. The image of them together burned into my mind, a cruel scar I'd never erase. I remember staring at the text message, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped my phone. I read it over and over, hoping, praying that I was mistaken. But no, there it was, plain as day, the confirmation of my worst fears. It wasn't just work. For months I had tried to push aside the growing unease. Michael and I had been married for nearly 8 years, and though our relationship had its challenges, I never doubted his love for me. But something had shifted when his company began to take off, and he partnered with Olivia. She was everything I wasn't: sharp, confident, stunningly beautiful. A force to be reckoned with in every room she entered. I wanted to like her, I really did. After all, she was helping Michael grow his dream into something tangible. But soon she wasn't just his business partner. She became a constant presence in our lives. It started innocently enough: late-night phone calls, brainstorming sessions that stretched into the early hours, weekend trips to meet clients. Michael reassured me every step of the way. "It's just business," he'd say, kissing my forehead as I lay awake waiting for him to return. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that the man I had built my life with wasn't capable of such betrayal. But Olivia's name became a shadow that followed me everywhere. He spoke about her constantly, her ideas, her ambition, her insight. The way his eyes lit up when he mentioned her was a look I hadn't seen in a long time. Not for me, anyway. He'd come home smelling of her perfume, claiming she hugged everyone after meetings. Her lipstick once stained the rim of his coffee cup, which he swore was just a mix-up in the office kitchen. The excuses piled up like bricks, building a wall between us I couldn't climb over. I tried to confront him about it one night, my voice shaking as I asked if there was something I should be worried about. He laughed, brushing my concerns aside with practiced ease. "Don't be ridiculous, Emma. Olivia and I are building something incredible here. Don't let your imagination ruin it." But it wasn't my imagination. One night he didn't come home. I stayed up all night, pacing the living room, dialing his number repeatedly. Each time it went to voicemail. When he finally stumbled through the door at 6 in the morning, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled, I demanded answers. He claimed he'd fallen asleep at the office after a particularly grueling project deadline. "Why didn't you call?" I cried, my voice raw with anguish. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he replied, his tone clipped. "You're overreacting." But I wasn't. The cracks widened, and with each passing day, I felt him slipping further and further away. His attention was always elsewhere: his phone, his laptop, his next meeting. And more often than not, it involved Olivia. She consumed him, a vortex pulling him into a world I wasn't a part of. The breaking point came when I followed him one evening. He'd told me he was meeting Olivia to discuss a new investor pitch. My gut told me otherwise. So I drove to the restaurant he mentioned, parking discreetly and watching from a distance. They were seated at a table in the corner, their heads close together, laughter bubbling up between them. His hand rested on hers, a gesture far too intimate for colleagues. I felt sick. Tears blurred my vision as I watched him lean in, pressing a kiss to her cheek. It wasn't an innocent peck. It lingered, full of unspoken promises. My heart shattered in that moment. I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. This was the man who had sworn to love me forever, who had held my hand through every trial, who had built a life with me. And he was hers now. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I drove home, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. How long had this been going on? Had I been blind to the signs, or had I simply chosen not to see them? The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. When he came home, I was waiting. "How was dinner?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. He froze, his face betraying a flicker of panic before he masked it with indifference. "Fine," he said shortly, brushing past me. But I couldn't let it go. "Were you with Olivia?" He turned, his eyes narrowing. "What are you implying?" "I saw you, Michael," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I saw you with her." His silence was deafening. The truth hung in the air between us, a gaping chasm neither of us could cross. He tried to apologize, to explain, but his words were hollow, meaningless. The damage was done. Olivia had taken everything from me. The man I loved, the life we'd built, the future I had dreamed of. And Michael? He let her. In the weeks that followed, I packed up my life piece by piece. Each box was a reminder of what we once had, now tainted by his betrayal. The divorce papers were the final nail in the coffin of our marriage, a painful but necessary step toward reclaiming my dignity. I don't know if Michael ever regretted what he did. I don't know if Olivia was worth the destruction of everything we had. But I do know this: I will never again ignore my intuition. Because in the end, it wasn't just Olivia who destroyed my marriage. It was Michael's choice to let her. The weeks after I left Michael were a blur of pain and self-doubt. I spent hours replaying every moment, every decision, every glance he had ever shared with Olivia. Was it something I did? Was I not enough? Those thoughts haunted me, eating away at my confidence like a slow, insidious poison. Friends tried to comfort me, offering platitudes about how it wasn't my fault, how Michael had made his choices and I was better off without him. But their words felt hollow, like wrapping a bandage around a wound too deep to heal with mere words. The truth was, I didn't feel better off. I felt broken. I stopped going to places we used to frequent together. The coffee shop where we'd spent lazy Saturday mornings, the park where he proposed, even the grocery store we always shopped at. It was all tainted by his betrayal. Everywhere I turned, memories of him lingered like ghosts, reminding me of what I'd lost. One evening, as I sat alone on the couch in my tiny new apartment, I opened my laptop. It was a moment of weakness, driven by the masochistic urge to know what he was doing, if he was thinking of me, if he missed me at all. I typed his name into the search bar and found exactly what I feared. A photo of him and Olivia at some charity gala, smiling as if the world hadn't just fallen apart for me. She looked radiant in a sleek black dress, her hand resting possessively on his arm. He looked happy, happier than I'd seen him in years. My stomach twisted and I slammed the laptop shut, tears spilling over before I could stop them. I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this, tethered to the wreckage of what had been. If Michael had moved on so easily, then I had to find a way to do the same. But where do you even begin to rebuild when everything you thought you knew about love and trust has been shattered? I started small. Therapy was my first step, though walking into that office felt like admitting defeat. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Harper, listened patiently as I poured out my pain. She didn't judge or offer meaningless reassurances. Instead, she gently guided me toward understanding that Michael's actions were a reflection of him, not me. You can't control what someone else chooses to do, she told me during one session. But you can control how you respond, how you heal, and what you choose to carry forward. Her words stuck with me. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and determined, ready to face the world again. Other days I felt like I was drowning in grief, unable to pull myself out of the memories that still clung to me. I avoided social media altogether, not wanting to see any more glimpses of Michael and Olivia's new life together. But as time passed, I began to rediscover pieces of myself that I had lost during my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I spent weekends hiking, losing myself in the solace of nature. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected while trying to hold together a marriage that was already slipping through my fingers. And slowly, I began to see a future that didn't include Michael. One afternoon, while browsing a local bookstore, I struck up a conversation with a man named Alex. He had an easy smile and a warmth that felt genuine, not forced. We talked about books and travel, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. Really laughed. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, proof that maybe, just maybe, I could feel something other than heartbreak again. Alex and I started seeing each other casually. He was patient, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. He knew about Michael, about Olivia, about the pain I was still carrying. But he didn't try to fix me or offer empty promises. He simply showed up, day after day, proving that not all men were like my ex-husband. As months turned into a year, I began to see Michael and Olivia's relationship for what it truly was. A betrayal, yes, but also a wake-up call. I had spent so much of my marriage bending over backward to support Michael's dreams that I had lost sight of my own. His infidelity forced me to confront hard truths about myself, about the way I had given too much without expecting enough in return. One day, as I was packing up some old boxes in my apartment, I came across a photo of Michael and me from our honeymoon. We were on the beach, arms wrapped around each other, smiling as if the world couldn't touch us. For a moment I felt a pang of sadness for the people we used to be. But then I realized something: those people no longer existed. And that was okay. I shredded the photo and moved on. Michael tried to contact me once, about a year after our divorce was finalized. He sent a long email, apologizing for the pain he had caused and admitting that he and Olivia were having issues. He said he missed me, that he realized too late what he had lost. But by then, I had no interest in reopening that chapter. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony watching the sunset. I had survived. No, more than that, I had thrived. Michael and Olivia had destroyed the life I thought I wanted, but in doing so, they forced me to build something stronger, something that belonged solely to me. For that, I was strangely grateful. Because in the end, I had found something far more valuable than the love I lost. I had found myself. Months turned into years, and the memory of Michael began to fade into a distant chapter of my life. It wasn't immediate, of course. Healing from something so profound takes time. And even when you think you're past it, the scars remain, faint but visible. There were still moments when the thought of him would creep into my mind, uninvited and unwelcome. Sometimes it came when I saw a couple laughing together in a restaurant, or when I passed a man in the street wearing the same cologne he used to wear. The difference was, those moments no longer shattered me. They passed like clouds on a sunny day, momentary and fleeting. By then, my life had taken on a rhythm that felt entirely my own. I had started working at a local art gallery, curating exhibits and connecting with artists whose passion reignited my own creativity. The gallery became more than a job. It was a space where I felt alive, where I could pour my energy into something meaningful. My weekends were no longer filled with waiting for a husband who wouldn't come home. They were spent painting, hiking, or sharing long conversations over coffee with Alex, who had quietly become an important part of my life. Alex was different from Michael in every way that mattered. He wasn't flashy or overly ambitious, but he was steady and kind. He didn't make grand gestures or sweeping promises. Instead, he showed up every day with quiet consistency. He really listened when I talked, and he never made me feel small for the emotions I carried. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Alex turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about reaching out to him?" he asked gently, not out of jealousy or insecurity, but out of genuine curiosity. I thought about it for a moment, swirling the wine in my glass. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not because I miss him. It's more curiosity, I guess. I wonder if he's happy. If he regrets what he did." Alex nodded, his gaze steady. "And if he does? Would it change anything for you?" I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "No. It wouldn't. I've made my peace with it. Michael's choices were his own, and they don't define me anymore." It was the truth. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing closure from him. The apology he had sent that I never answered? It no longer felt like a loose thread, but a reminder of how far I'd come. I had built a new life, one that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs or dreams but my own. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The gallery was hosting an opening for a new exhibit one Friday evening, and as I mingled with guests, I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but as the figure moved closer, my heart stopped. It was Michael. He looked older, though not dramatically so. His once impeccably styled hair had a few streaks of gray, and there was a weariness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. For a moment I froze, unsure of how to react. He must have sensed my hesitation because he approached cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the peace I had found. "Emma," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. "Regret, perhaps?" "Michael," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't exactly thrilled to see him either. "I didn't know you worked here," he said, glancing around the gallery. "This is amazing." "Thank you," I said simply, keeping the conversation polite. "What brings you here?" He hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I heard about the exhibit and thought I'd check it out. I didn't realize you'd be here." There was an awkward pause before he added, "You look good." Happy. I am, I said firmly, meeting his gaze. And you? He let out a soft sigh, running a hand through his hair. I'm fine, I guess. Things didn't work out with Olivia. His voice faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I once loved. I made a lot of mistakes, Emma. I've been meaning to tell you that in person. You already did, I said, referring to the email he'd sent. And I appreciated it. But I don't think there's anything left to say. He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging slightly. I understand. I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve it. Thank you, I said, offering a small smile. I hope you find what you're looking for too. With that, he left, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. I stood there for a moment, processing the encounter. It didn't hurt the way I thought it might. If anything, it felt like the final piece of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Later that night, as Alex and I sat on my couch, I told him about the encounter. He listened without interruption, his hand resting gently on mine. When I finished, he simply said, I'm proud of you. For the first time, I realized I was proud of myself too. Proud of the way I had rebuilt my life, proud of the woman I had become, and proud of the fact that I no longer needed validation from anyone else. Not Michael, not Olivia, not even Alex. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me. I had taken the pain and turned it into strength, and for that I was deeply, unapologetically grateful. As life moved forward, the ripples of my past grew smaller, less intrusive, until they barely disturbed the surface of my day-to-day existence. Michael's sudden reappearance at the gallery had unsettled me at first, but it didn't take long to realize it was just another moment in my journey, a footnote rather than a defining chapter. What mattered now was the life I was creating, the love I was discovering, not just with Alex but within myself. My work at the gallery flourished, and I found myself more deeply involved in the art world than I had ever imagined. We began collaborating with local artists, hosting community workshops, and even organizing traveling exhibits. It was more than a career. It was a purpose, a way to connect with people and help them tell their stories. I often thought about how lost I had felt after leaving Michael, how aimless my life had seemed. To think I had found so much fulfillment in something I had once considered a hobby felt like a small miracle. Alex became a quiet, steady presence in my life. He didn't try to fill the space Michael had left, nor did he try to rush me into defining what we were. Our relationship grew organically, built on mutual respect, and an easy companionship that felt nothing like the suffocating intensity one had once mistaken for love. He understood my hesitations, my lingering fears, and never once made me feel like they were burdens I had to shed for his sake. For the first time, I felt what it meant to be truly supported, to be seen not as a role to fill but as a whole person. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, Alex turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Emma, he began, his tone careful, do you ever think about what you want next? For yourself, I mean. Not for us necessarily. I paused, considering his question. It wasn't something I had allowed myself to think about for a long time. My focus had been on rebuilding, on surviving. But now, with the pieces of my life falling into place, I realized I had the freedom to dream again. I think, I said slowly, I want to keep exploring who I am. I spent so much of my marriage trying to be the perfect wife, trying to fit into Michael's vision of what our life should be, that I lost sight of my own dreams. I don't want to lose that again. Alex nodded, his expression warm. I think that's a good plan. And I'll be here wherever you decide to go. His words settled over me like a comforting blanket. It wasn't a promise of forever or a grand declaration. It was simply a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to navigate this new chapter of my life in isolation. Over the next few months, I began to take small steps toward those dreams. I started painting more seriously, experimenting with different mediums and styles. The gallery even hosted a small showcase of my work, something I never would have imagined possible a few years ago. Seeing people admire my art, engage with it, and even purchase pieces was an experience that left me both humbled and exhilarated. It was a reminder that I had something to offer the world, something uniquely my own. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of my past threatened to pull me under. One such moment came unexpectedly. during a phone call with an old friend who had recently reconnected with Michael. She hadn't meant to hurt me. Her intention was simply to check in, to see how I was doing after all this time. But her words reopened wounds I thought had healed. "Michael's been struggling," she said. "He talks about you sometimes. I think he regrets everything that happened." I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to ask questions, to dig into the details of his struggles, as if understanding his pain could somehow validate my own. But another part of me, the stronger part, realized that it didn't matter. Michael's regrets, his struggles, his life were no longer my concern. The closure I had sought for so long wasn't something he could give me. It was something I had already found within myself. "I hope he finds peace," I said finally, my voice steady. And I meant it. For all the pain he had caused me, I didn't wish him ill. But I also didn't wish to carry his burdens anymore. That conversation marked a turning point. It was a reminder that healing isn't a straight path. It's a winding road, full of unexpected twists and turns. But with each step forward, I grew stronger, more confident in my ability to face whatever came next. Alex and I eventually decided to move in together, not as a declaration of forever but as a natural progression of the life we were building. Our home became a reflection of both of us. His love for music evident in the collection of vinyl records lining the shelves, my passion for art showcased in the pieces we carefully selected together. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. One day, as I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by the life we had created, I realized how far I had come. The woman I had been when I first met Michael, the woman who had clung so tightly to a failing marriage out of fear and insecurity, felt like a distant memory. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had faced heartbreak and come out the other side not unscathed but undeniably whole. I didn't know what the future held, and for the first time in a long time that didn't scare me. Life wasn't about guarantees or neatly tied endings. It was about growth, about finding joy in the unexpected, about learning to trust yourself even when the path ahead is uncertain. And so I kept walking forward step by step, into a future that was entirely beautifully my own. As time stretched on, life began to feel like an open canvas, each day a new stroke of color. I had stopped keeping track of the exact number of months or years since I had left Michael, because it no longer mattered. The timeline wasn't important. What mattered was the person I had become, the freedom I felt in crafting a life I truly loved. The gallery continued to grow, and I found myself busier than ever. We had gained a reputation in the community as a space where both established and emerging artists could showcase their work, and that filled me with an indescribable sense of pride. I began mentoring younger artists, guiding them as they navigated the challenges of expressing their visions to the world. Seeing their excitement reminded me of my own journey, the way I had rediscovered myself through art. It felt like giving back, a way to pass along the light I had fought so hard to find. Alex became my greatest supporter in this phase of my life. He didn't just encourage me, he was actively involved, helping to set up events, designing promotional materials, and even offering his perspective on pieces I was hesitant to display. It wasn't just his actions that mattered, but the way he made me feel valued, understood, and cherished in a way I hadn't experienced before. He didn't try to fix me or reshape me. He simply allowed me to be, and that was the greatest gift of all. One evening, as we sat together in our cozy living room, he turned to me with an expression I'd come to recognize as his serious face. "Emma," he began, setting down his glass of wine, "have you ever thought about taking your own work on the road?" I blinked at him, caught off guard. "On the road? What do you mean?" "I mean your art. You've been so focused on the gallery, but your own work has so much potential. What if you showcased it outside of the city? Maybe even took a tour to other galleries? It's something I think you should consider." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. I had grown comfortable in the cocoon of my city, the familiarity of the gallery and the network I had built. But Alex was right. My art had grown and evolved just as I had, and maybe it was time to take that next step. The thought lingered in my mind over the next few weeks, and eventually, I began reaching out to galleries in other cities to see if there was any interest. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Within a few months, I had planned a small tour, showcasing my work in a handful of cities across the country. It was a whirlwind experience, filled with excitement and nerves, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Each gallery visit brought new connections, new conversations, and new opportunities to share my story. Not just the pain of the past, but the resilience and hope that had come after. Traveling also gave me a chance to see the world through a new lens. I spent hours wandering unfamiliar streets, sketching the details of cities that felt both foreign and inviting. I visited museums, soaked in the history of places I'd only read about, and allowed myself to dream bigger than I ever had before. It was as if I had opened a door to a part of myself that had been waiting patiently for me to find it. Through all of this, Alex was my constant. He joined me for some of the trips when his schedule allowed, and when he couldn't, he supported me from afar with calls and messages that kept me grounded. He never once made me feel guilty for pursuing my ambitions or for being away from home. Instead, he celebrated my successes as if they were his own. One night after a particularly successful show in Chicago, we sat in a small cafe, the buzz of the evening still fresh in my mind. Alex reached across the table and took my hand, his eyes steady and warm. "Emma," he said softly, "I've never met anyone like you. Watching you grow, seeing you thrive like this. It's the most incredible thing I've ever been a part of." His words hit me deeply, and for a moment I felt tears welling up. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of gratitude I felt for this man who had come into my life when I least expected it. I had thought love would always feel like a storm, tumultuous and all-consuming. But with Alex it was more like a sunrise, steady, warm, and full of promise. As my art tour came to an end, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. The experience had shown me not only what I was capable of, but also how far I had come from the woman who once doubted her worth. My work at the gallery took on new dimensions, as I began hosting workshops that combined art with healing, sharing my own journey as a way to inspire others. The response was incredible, and it reinforced the belief that our stories, no matter how painful, have the power to connect us in ways we never imagined. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the shadows of the past crept in uninvited, but they no longer held the same power over me. I had learned to acknowledge them, to feel their weight, and then to let them go. They were just memories now, not chains. One afternoon, as I stood in the gallery watching a group of young artists work on their pieces, I realized how much joy I felt in that moment. It wasn't a fleeting happiness, the kind that depends on external circumstances. It was a deep, abiding sense of contentment, rooted in the knowledge that I had built this life with my own two hands. Looking back, I knew I would always carry the lessons of my past with me. Michael and Olivia had been part of my story, but they didn't define it. Their betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also set me free. And in that freedom, I had discovered something far more valuable than anything I had lost. I had discovered myself. As the seasons passed, I grew more certain of one truth. My life had become something entirely my own. The shadows of my past had dimmed, not erased but softened, their edges no longer sharp enough to wound me. Every day felt like a quiet testament to the resilience I had found within myself, and for the first time, I could look back without bitterness, only understanding. Life had a way of unfolding in unexpected, sometimes painful, but ultimately meaningful ways. The gallery continued to thrive, a hub of creativity and connection. We expanded our programming to include community art initiatives, working with schools, local charities, and even correctional facilities to bring art into spaces that often felt forgotten. It was deeply rewarding to see how the act of creating could heal, could open doors for people to express things they didn't have the words for. Every success felt like a small victory, not just for the artists we supported but for me personally. A reminder of how far I had come. My relationship with Alex deepened in ways that surprised me. We had both approached it cautiously at first, careful not to repeat the mistakes of our pasts. But over time, what began as something quiet and tentative grew into something solid and deeply meaningful. He wasn't the kind of man who made grand declarations, but his love showed in the little things. The way he would remember my favorite tea without asking, the way he listened intently when I talked about my day, the way he always left space for me to be myself without judgment or expectation. One evening, as we walked along the shore during a weekend trip to the coast, he stopped suddenly and turned to face me. The setting sun cast a golden glow over everything, and the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks filled the silence between us. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but filled with a rare vulnerability, I know we've both been careful, and I know we've taken our time, but I want you to know something. You're it for me. You're my person. And I'm ready for whatever the next step looks like, as long as it's with you." I didn't know what to say at first. The words caught in my throat as I stared at him, his face open and earnest. My mind raced with thoughts of how far we'd come, how different this love felt from anything I'd ever known. With Alex, there was no fear, no desperation to hold on or prove myself. There was only trust and a quiet certainty that we were better together than apart. "I feel the same," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." He smiled, the kind of smile that made my heart ache in the best way. And we continued walking hand in hand, the moment settling between us like an unspoken promise. As our lives intertwined further, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been before. The one who had stayed in a crumbling marriage out of fear of the unknown. The one who had doubted her worth because of someone else's choices. I hardly recognized her anymore, and that realization brought a bittersweet kind of relief. I wasn't angry with her. I understood why she had clung so tightly to something that was falling apart. But I also felt immense pride in the woman I had become, the one who had faced that pain and chosen to rise above it. One day, while organizing a new exhibit featuring local female artists, I was struck by a familiar name on the submission list. Olivia. At first, I wasn't sure it was her, but as I read the attached bio, there was no mistaking it. She had started painting recently, using art as a way to process her own struggles. The irony wasn't lost on me. For a brief moment, I considered rejecting the submission outright. The idea of her work being displayed in the gallery I had poured my heart into felt like a betrayal of everything I had built. But then I stopped myself. Rejecting her wouldn't erase the past, nor would it bring me any real satisfaction. If anything, it would mean I was still letting her hold power over me, and I was done with that. I accepted her submission. When the day of the exhibit arrived, I found myself scanning the room for her. Part of me hoped she wouldn't come, that she would send someone else in her place, but as the crowd thickened, I spotted her near the back of the room. She looked different from how I remembered, softer, more subdued. Gone was the confident, almost predatory energy she had exuded during my marriage to Michael. She looked smaller somehow, as if life had worn her down in ways I couldn't see but could recognize nonetheless. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw her hesitate before approaching me. I braced myself, unsure of what she might say. "Emma," she began, her voice quiet. "I didn't think you'd approve my work. I wasn't sure if you'd even want to see me." "I don't do personal grudges in art," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your work speaks for itself." She nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I needed to say it." I studied her for a moment, searching for any trace of insincerity, but there was none. She looked genuinely remorseful, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected, compassion. Not for what she had done, but for the fact that she too was human, flawed and broken in her own ways. "Thank you," I said simply. "I hope you find peace." She nodded again, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and then she walked away. I watched her go, feeling lighter somehow, as if I had finally let go of the last remnants of anger I didn't even realize I was still carrying. The exhibit was a success, and as I stood among the crowd, surrounded by the vibrant energy of artists and admirers, I realized that forgiveness wasn't just something you gave to others. It was something you gave to yourself. By letting go of the past, I had made room for so much more. Joy, love, purpose, and a future that was entirely my own. That night, as Alex and I sat together on the couch, his arm draped around my shoulders, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the pain, for the lessons, for the journey that had led me here. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was mine. And that was more than enough. The months that followed the exhibit brought a kind of peace I had never thought possible. My days were full, not with frantic activity but with purpose. I woke up every morning looking forward to what lay ahead, whether it was organizing a new event at the gallery, spending time with Alex, or simply enjoying the quiet solitude of painting in my studio. Life had found a rhythm, one that felt balanced and wholly mine. The gallery's success continued to grow, and with it came new opportunities. I was invited to speak at conferences about the intersection of art and healing, something I had become deeply passionate about. At first, the thought of standing in front of a room full of strangers terrified me, but I reminded myself of how far I had come. If I could survive the betrayal and heartbreak of the past, I could certainly stand on a stage and share my story. The first time I spoke, my voice shook, but as I saw the faces in the audience, many of them nodding in understanding, I felt my confidence grow. By the end, I was no longer afraid. Each event brought new connections, and with them, a growing realization that my story wasn't just mine. It was part of something larger, a shared experience of loss and resilience that so many others could relate to. People would approach me after my talks, thanking me for my honesty and sharing their own stories in return. It was humbling to see how something so painful could become a source of connection and hope. Alex was there for every milestone, quietly cheering me on from the sidelines. He never sought to take the spotlight or make my accomplishments about him, and that humility only deepened my love for him. We didn't rush into any grand decisions about our future, but we didn't need to. We both knew we were building something strong, something lasting, and that was enough. One weekend, as we were cleaning out the storage space in my apartment, I came across an old box labeled Emma and Michael. For a moment I froze, my hand hovering over the lid. Alex noticed and paused, giving me a questioning look. "Do you want me to help with that?" he asked gently, always careful not to push. I shook my head. "No. I think I need to do this on my own." He nodded and stepped back, giving me space as I opened the box. Inside were relics of a life I had almost forgotten. Photos from our wedding, anniversary cards, little souvenirs from trips we had taken together. Each item brought a flicker of memory, some happy, some painful, but none that held the same power over me they once did. I sifted through the contents slowly, taking my time to honor what those years had meant, even if they had ended in heartbreak. By the time I reached the bottom of the box, I felt lighter. I didn't need to hold on to these things anymore. They weren't my present, and they certainly weren't my future. That evening, Alex helped me take the box to a donation center. It felt symbolic, a final act of letting go. And as we drove away, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known I needed. Life continued to unfold in small but meaningful ways. The gallery expanded to include a second location in a nearby city. A project that kept me busy but also excited for what was to come. I traveled often, not just for work but for pleasure, exploring places I had always dreamed of visiting. Alex and I took a trip to Europe one summer, spending weeks wandering through art museums, tasting unfamiliar foods, and laughing at our attempts to navigate in foreign languages. It was the kind of experience that reminded me how much joy there was to be found in the world, even after everything I had been through. One evening, as we sat on a terrace overlooking the canals in Venice, Alex reached for my hand. There was a tenderness in his eyes that made my breath catch. "Emma," he said softly, "I've never been one for big speeches, but I want you to know something. You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible. You've shown me what it means to love and be loved, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you marry me?" For a moment I couldn't speak. Tears blurred my vision as I looked at him. This man who had come into my life when I was at my lowest and helped me build something beautiful. He wasn't my savior. I had done the hard work of healing myself, but he had been my partner, my anchor, my constant through it all. "Yes," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "Of course, yes." The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, not because I wanted a lavish wedding, but because I wanted it to reflect the life we had built together. We chose a small ceremony in a garden surrounded by the people who had supported us through everything. There were no elaborate decorations, no grand displays, just love and gratitude for the journey that had brought us to that moment. As I stood there, holding Alex's hands and looking into his eyes, I felt a profound sense of peace. The vows we exchanged weren't about perfection or promises we couldn't keep. They were about partnership, about choosing each other every day, even when life wasn't easy. After the ceremony, as the sun set and our guests laughed and danced under the twinkling lights, I took a moment to step back and take it all in. This was my life now, full of love, art, and the kind of happiness that came not from perfection but from perseverance. I thought about the woman I had been all those years ago, the one who had cried herself to sleep wondering if she would ever be okay again. She felt like a different person, Someone I had outgrown but would always carry with me as a reminder of how far I had come. The future stretched out before me, unknown and unpredictable, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced the worst and come out stronger, and I knew that whatever lay ahead, I could handle it. Because this time I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And that made all the difference. As the years unfolded, the life Alex and I built together became a tapestry of quiet, enduring moments. We didn't chase perfection and we didn't need to. Instead, we focused on the small joys, the laughter we shared over lazy Sunday breakfasts, the evenings spent listening to music, the way he would instinctively reach for my hand during a movie. It was in those ordinary moments that I found the extraordinary. A love rooted not in grand gestures but in the everyday choice to cherish each other. The gallery flourished beyond anything I had imagined when I first began. We hosted artists from all over the world, creating a community that celebrated creativity, resilience, and connection. My workshops on art and healing expanded into a program that reached far beyond the city, helping people process their struggles through the act of creating. It became my life's work, and every time someone told me their story or thanked me for helping them rediscover hope, I felt that familiar sense of fulfillment that made all the effort worthwhile. Our home became a sanctuary filled with art, music, and memories. We had built a space that reflected who we were individually and together. A blend of his warmth and humor with my passion and creativity. Over time, we filled it with reminders of the life we shared. Photographs from our travels, sketches I made during quiet evenings, and even the occasional goofy keepsake Alex couldn't resist picking up. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves outside our home turned brilliant shades of red and gold, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this moment. I stood in my studio, a half-finished painting on the easel in front of me, and thought about the journey that had led me here. The heartbreak, the uncertainty, the fear. All of it had shaped me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until now. It wasn't just the pain that had defined me. It was the strength I had found in its aftermath, the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path was unclear. Alex walked into the room, a steaming cup of tea in his hands. He set it down on the table beside me and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice soft. "Just life," I said, leaning into him. How different it all turned out from what I expected. How much better. He smiled against my cheek. "You're incredible, you know that? Everything you've built, everything you've overcome. I hope you're proud of yourself." I turned to face him, my heart full as I looked into his eyes. "I am," I said honestly. "I'm proud of us." In that moment, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was still searching for. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, not to Michael, not to Olivia, not even to myself, but because I had finally embraced the life I had created, the person I had become, and the love I had found. The past would always be a part of me, a chapter in my story, but it no longer defined me. What mattered was the present, the life I was living, and the future I was building with Alex by my side. I didn't need to look back anymore. The road ahead was where I belonged. And so, with the sun casting a warm glow over our little home, I took Alex's hand, smiled, and stepped forward into the rest of our lives.